Oh, look at this distinguished gentleman. Look at the way he subs. Marvellous form. And there it is, the pinky fully extended. And of course, the dragon fruit punch flavour. The thinking man's choice of energy formula. Gamer subs. You plebeians can of course save 10%. Lord knows you only have a few pennies to rub together with the code Thorin. That's THORIN at gamersubs.gg. Toodles. Moses has been released by Team Liquid and replaced by adreN as the coach of their team. Obviously, adreN previously worked with them in the past, with basically a couple of days apart on the announcements. So let's do it like we do my usual trade or transfer scenarios. Should Team Liquid have removed Moses? I mean, he was with the team less than 9 months. Grim had only been there a week when he joined. Twists was removed about 4 months into Moses' tenure. Fallen joined early January, and obviously he wasn't initially the in-game leader. And for contrast, the team that adreN now inherits, obviously none of those factors are at play there. He's inheriting a team that potentially he can just start running with. And to use the old analogy I used to use for Zeus in adreN, maybe Moses helped get the lid off a little bit. And now adreN might get the credit for popping off, which obviously I think happened a little bit with Zeus. He led some of the fundamentals, the tactics, he got the players in a good headspace. And then adreN came along and did whatever it was and took them to that next level, moving into 2019. So let's just look at titles, because when you look at a team like Team Liquid, let's be real, Team Liquid in terms of CSGO, they're supposed to be, especially now that they have this like hammerlock on the top NA talent for the last few years, basically most of the superstar players you'd want to build a team around, they had simultaneously in the team with the other superstars. You look at them, they're supposed to be a Real Madrid, a Barcelona, an AC Milan, a Juventus, a Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool, these great teams that in theory are supposed to be champions if you have the right players. So you just look at titles. Yes, it was all during the online period for Moses, but he didn't win a single title, even in North America. That's very underwhelming when you consider the team he's on, some of the players he has. You look at the period where they went to Europe. Okay, they managed to make the final of the IM Global Challenge. Didn't win it. They managed to place top 4 at Blast Global. And we were close. No cigar. And then obviously IM Katowice looked in great form in the bracket. Only managed to finish top 4. Aside from that, it's disappointing placings. And quite frankly, some of those in isolation, in a vacuum, are disappointing placings anyway, because some of these championships potentially you're going to win if you're the best team, if you're the best coach, potentially. Now, based on titles, as I've alluded to, because I know a lot of other people go off that, yeah, you should remove him because you should pick someone else and you should see if they can win titles, and then that will be your metric as to whether they're good or bad. Now, I will say, I do think he had the players to win not all these titles, but certainly North American titles, and maybe 1 or 2 of these titles. Certainly the players to be an elite team, which I think they were often like, they barely were edging into being elite, and then they would edge back out again. I always thought, after the first few months, especially coming into this European period, Moses did have them on the brink of being elite, being a champion. They just didn't quite make it. No excuses for that. They didn't make it. Maybe someone else has a crack and it works for them. I will say, though, as I alluded to before, in the same way as adreN now inherits a very different team than the one Moses started with, I also think it's worth pointing out that he doesn't have the team that adreN had when adreN won the Grand Slam and had that almost era, etc., and all that crazy shit. So as a result, they shouldn't quite have had those expectations. Historically, those are now established as the expectations, but those might have been a slight bit too high. The point with that team was supposed to win many championships on LAN, be the number 1 team in the world, win the major. Some of that's a little bit further than what I expected of this lineup, a very experimental Team Liquid lineup. And quite frankly, I don't think as skilled a Team Liquid lineup, even if potentially they've got an upgraded in-game leader and AWPer. So even so, as I alluded to before, you should still be the dominant team in NA. You should still be winning in NA. And I think you should at least be dangerous in Europe. You should be one of those teams people are scared to play in a semi-final or a quarter-final, even if they're the favourite. Now, I've heard from around the scene, we put my feelers out there, it wasn't mutual. Like, this wasn't a scenario where Moses was like, yeah, I want to step down, it's not working for me. It wasn't that, like, players were like, no, let's keep Moses, like, we got it. I heard basically it was player-based / a mutiny. Like, players just decided they weren't happy with it, and then for whatever reason, presumably they've gone to the organisation, this is the end result. Now, I did have issues with Moses coaching this particular team, quite frankly. Like, I wasn't super in on it when it was announced. In fact, you'll notice I've been fairly conservative when it comes to people like Janko, people like Moses, people like Henry, taking these team-based positions because it's a different field. And even if they have the knowledge, will it apply? Will they learn the other skills you need to? Will the players be the right players? I always say you can have the right manager or coach, but the wrong set of players. You can sometimes have the right players for not even the best coach, and that might make him look like the best coach. It's a very, very difficult thing to tell what the coach does, contrasted with the players. We can only infer or go off things we've heard. So one of my problems is I feel as though them recruiting Moses, listen, is into the team is Stewie, and then some of the other players he's known for many years, he's known everyone in the team Liquid all. To me, some of it was that they liked him, and so I actually had the concern that they brought him in because they wanted a friend. They wanted somebody who's going to represent them, and who's going to have the right attitude and energy and all this stuff. They even alluded to some in like his leaving message, right? But my problem is when I looked at those players, the 2019 lineup onwards, I've always thought they need a boss and a leader. They never had true leadership within the team. Nitro wasn't that type of a guy. They never had a true boss in the team. The closest is maybe Elige, and even then, he's not that vocal a boss. It's just that he has very high standards and he can be very demanding. And I certainly would never say someone's toxic, but he can have a big ego himself. He can be a guy who has a certain way that he wants to do things. If you clash with him, you're going to clash with him. He's not going to be quiet about that, even though he can be quiet in other ways as a technique of dealing with it. It's actually, he's a very complicated guy, actually. So I actually think they didn't recruit for what they needed. They recruited for something that could have brought good things as well and could have elevated some of their players. But I don't think it address their fundamental flaw as a team. Now, you'll notice there's no real reason given by the team. I looked online, listen, players don't have to say things when their coach leaves, etc. But it's pretty common in esports, and I can tell you from behind the scenes, that usually when a player, sometimes even not a very good player, a player that didn't make it in the team, or a player they think's bad now, or a coach that they didn't like, it's actually pretty common. Most players will just say something nice anyway on Twitter. They'll say, oh, thanks, it's great, I wish we could have gone differently. Like, they'll say what they think the fans want to hear, or they'll just try and think, oh, even though I didn't like the guy, I'll just be nice to him for a minute, he's leaving the team anyway. I notice in this scenario, Stewie and Fallen were the only players who posted a personal message to Moses. Some of the others just retweeted. Now listen, yeah, Grim and Naf aren't that vocal, but you would think if they'd like working with the guy, well, you don't have any comment at all, not even a tweet. Then you think, who would it be behind a move like this? I mean, I start to think it through. Stewie definitely fucked with Moses. Fallen, I'm not sure on that one. To me, I think Elige and Fallen are the two that feel like the culprits here. They feel like the ones that would motivate the move. Listen, another thing teams love to do, in the same way as they all claim there's no shot caller in IGL in like games like CSGO and League of Legends, they love to all take equal credit so they can take equal blame. So as a result, what they love to do is go, this was a decision between the whole team. That's not the way decisions work. Someone has to put an idea forwards. Often they have to discuss with others and convince them with reasoning. Then those people might agree. Now listen, them agreeing could activate the move. You alone coming in saying kick this guy isn't enough. But if you didn't say kick this guy in the first place, some of those others never had that thought. It never happens. And so there's certainly blame and responsibility to go to everyone, but my question is, who was the culprit behind this? Who was the driving angle? Now, in terms of Elige, like I say, I just think he's someone who has very high standards and a very set way of doing things, and I think you've got to be very careful how you handle a player like that. Sometimes, quite frankly, I think a player that might actually need to have discipline in a way that maybe he doesn't want. I've heard lots of stories of different coaches and players he's been around his whole career. The Fallen angle, I think, is pretty interesting. Maybe I'll do a different video about that someday. Basically, I've never actually gotten the sense Fallen either A, thinks coaches are necessary, or B, has actually particularly liked the coaches he had as coaches. Maybe he liked them as people. Maybe he liked them to work with some of his other teammates. But you look at his teams. So he had Zeus and won 2 majors with him in 2016. Then they just let Zeus go. And quite frankly, they didn't seem too unhappy about it. They seemed fine. They still seemed to think they should win without him. By the way, they did win without him the next year, just not a major. Although they could have won PGL Krakow, certainly. There would be a different story. They were winning many championships. Then they got Janko in when things had gone bad in 2018. I personally think part of that is they didn't want to be humble and just admit the NA Brazilian lineup didn't work. And they wanted to have someone else to distract, deflect, take some of the flack, and eventually to scapegoat and blame, which I think effectively is what they did between Stewie, Tarek, and obviously Janko himself, right? Janko was in the team. Even though, by the way, Janko got them to a higher level of competition than where they'd been at in that lineup. Go have a look. Like, he had them right in position to do some big things, even playing against the likes of Astralis when Astralis was in peak form and playing them close. Then you go, they bring Zeus back. Zeus has just gone and basically made MIBR and Fallen look silly. He's just been off in Team Liquid, made them one of the best teams in the world, all the finals, beating Navi. They looked insane. Great record against his old team, by the way. They bring him back. don't really have that many good results. I got the sense they didn't listen to him very much. Players were stuck in their ways. They fire him during Flashpoint 1. Didn't let the tournament finish. I thought very rude way to do it. It was almost just open disrespect. Then they bring in Moses in terms of Fallen goes to Team Liquid, where Moses is. And what do you know? Moses out in a few months. Weird how that goes, isn't it? Like, basically, Zeus is the coach that Fallen's had the longest. If you're not called Zeus, you don't last that long, mate. I mean, Zeus the first time around didn't last a year. Zeus the second time around did a bit more, but they weren't a very good team. Basically, if you're anyone not called Zeus, it seems to me like you're not going to be in the team very long with Fallen. Like, eventually, that's going to be the domino that falls before something else in the game. Now, notice in the video when they were like, welcome home, adreN, they kept mentioning like his tactical prowess. That was like a central point, which, by the way, since they didn't say anything about when Moses left, it sort of implies that's the area they don't think Moses was good enough, or that they needed something extra from someone else. Now, I think Moses probably should have been removed in isolation. I don't think he got the success that the org and their history demands. I wish he could have had a few more months before they fired him. Presumably, they wanted to hard pivot in time for the major and have a lot of time to get into the floor things, especially if we come back to some lands in a few months. I also think the fact he never got to apply his long tenure of experience watching, playing the game on LAN in big matches, I think that sucks, because that's an area I really thought he could have actually maybe been a difference maker. I would have loved to at least see what he could have done in that regard, because he was a pro himself. He's performed at huge events. He's been talent and had to perform under the bright lights and in massive moments and have things thrown at you and react to things. I also will just say it's also extra brutal in a minor regard, because obviously Train was the permanent ban of Team Liquid, and it basically got removed either the day or the day after Moses was removed from the team. So he never actually got the chance to play in a world where, I mean, it'd be very interesting to see what the map pool will be like in that regard, right? In terms of the talent aspect, because Moses comes from the talent world, he was an analyst with me, and then obviously he was a commentator, colour commentator with, mainly with Anders, originally with Sadikist, if you actually didn't know that. I would just say this, if you are talent, it's time to wise up, guys, because a lot of you are wandering into this other total domain, this sort of tangential, but not, in my opinion, massively overlapping magisterium, as it were, of coming into being coaches, GMs, and you're thinking to yourself very naive thoughts. You're thinking, I know these players, or I know how they're going to react to me, or I have a relationship that's going to carry over, and it isn't, because the pro player that you have a beer with and are friends with, that's not the player you're going to meet when you're his boss, when he plays for you, when you're coaching him, when you might have to discipline him. There's a relationship boundary blur that's very dangerous there. It's one of the points that my friend Monte Cristo in League of Legends made many, many years ago, and he said, I don't think coaches should basically be friends with players. There should always be a certain distance, which could be based on respect, status, so that you can actually give them like criticism, feedback, etc. And you're not hurting your friend's feelings in that sense, or you're not worrying about your friend's feelings as a friend when you're trying to be his coach, etc. And obviously you don't want to have bias, nepotism, cronyism going on in your job. Now, another thing is, those organisations that sent you the swag and the merch and were loving, doing tweets about you when you say nice things about them, they'll use you up and throw you away like a commodity, because that's what you've become. You've become a piece on the chessboard, not a pawn. You're maybe in this scenario like a knight or a bishop, but you ain't the most important piece. You aren't the first piece that, I mean, I guess in that scenario you're a pawn in the sense that you tend to be the first piece they sacrifice, but they'll absolutely get rid of you if they think it plays into their longer strategy, no matter who you are and no matter how much value you might think you bring to that team. So I'll just say this. The final thing about talent moving into these positions is, if you really, really want to be a coach, don't just do it for the money. Don't just do it because you've got an amazing opportunity. Say, even do it publicly, I am becoming a coach now. I'm dedicating myself to this for years to come. I'm going to make this my full-time, all-in profession. And quite frankly, I think you shouldn't go to these top teams. I think these are poison chalice teams. They might be our one, not as much as just their fan base was going to think that. And they stupidly looked at the players like, oh my God, these players, how could you not win with them? Well, you saw how that worked for Zeus next year. I think he's one of the best coaches of all time. So what I would say is this. You look at Yanko with FaZe, you look at Henry G with Cloud9, and now you look at Moses with Team Liquid. You take it on gigs where you have to win. If you don't win the titles, it's going to be game over. If you're just like a top 10 team, ultimately that won't be good enough. I know it might have been good enough initially for Henry G because of the lineup he had, but eventually then the demands would be, now you got to win. So in my opinion, if you're going to go into a new area, you got to learn a new skill set, you got to apply your existing skill set differently. Be humble. Take a team that's like a top 10, a top 15 team. Take a team with a couple of young players in it. Work with them, make your mistakes with them early on, prove yourself, then get the big gig, and now you're not going to have these excuses. Well, I've never done it before. Well, you know, I only had a few months. Well, I was expected to have results immediately from day one. Yeah, that's what happens when you're the coach or the manager of an elite level team or an elite level group of talents. They're not bringing you in to start over like, well, in a few years. No, you're supposed to win now. That's what their team necessitates. Same way as if you're in Formula One. If I give you the best car, you can't go, well, I'm still learning really how to drive at Formula One. No, the best car should be going to a driver who, when he sits in it, has the potential to win and will win. That's the whole point of the sport, basically, guys. It isn't about just feeling good and people just progress. It's about winning, of course. That's a massive respect of it. And being great at what you do. Now, in terms of bringing adreN back, listen, I have a very different feeling about adreN as a coach than I do as a player. I thought as a player, he was mega boosted for most of his CSGO career. I've heard he's a great Source player. I wasn't in Source, so I can't confirm or deny that. I'll just say this. I don't get this Team Liquid love affair with adreN. I think it's bizarre, aside from he's super good buddies with Joker Steve, and obviously people like ErikHillestad that were with him before have very good feelings about him. They all love him. I've always thought, by the way, if you've ever seen the way that Team Liquid ran their old school Dota 2 team, and particularly their old school StarCraft 2 team, they had way too much sort of familial affinity to people who weren't actually that good in the game, quite frankly, and kept some of them on. Classic examples, TLO or Ret, where they weren't actually, they didn't live up to, they were check stealers, and they weren't as vaguely as good as players on that team should have been, considering some of the championship level players like Taja that you had on those squads. Obviously later in Dota 2 they did a fantastic job. I would suggest Kuroki probably built that team if I had to guess. So one of my issues is this. As a coach, yeah, I do think actually when you have the success he has, you can't be bad. Put it that way. You can't win that many titles and that many in a row and have such a dominant... You can't be a bad coach and do that. You must at least be above average, in my opinion, if not good or potentially very good. Now, this is the issue. This is the third time he's been with his squad now. He was a player until 2016, when my boy Simple and Hiko effectively helped get him kicked out the team. He was a coach 2019 to 2020. I noticed a lot of people have forgotten that he was even the coach in 20... I had as well, so it kind of shows how underwhelming he was during that period of 2020. Now he's the coach again. As I've said, I think the mistake of the org is just overvaluing the personal relationships. I think it's about having a champion, someone who's going to win. And actually, I even think there's maybe someone as a coach needs to challenge the org. That's what I thought Zeus did when he went there, quite frankly. So I don't really get this move in terms of like, remove Moses, okay, but who am I replacing him with? Like, am I bringing in Kassad, Zeus? Is Zonic going to change teams? Am I going to try Blade? Am I going to go with some legendary epic? No, you're bringing this guy back in, but he's already been in your team, even with some of these players. Admittedly, only two of them. Right, listen, he accomplished great things with them in 2019. So, some very great things. I'm going to do some content about that team soon enough. You cannot take that away from him. You cannot diminish what he did during that time. As I say, you can't win like that and be a bad coach, in my opinion. Not a bad coach for your team, at least. Now, you even look at the way they played. They had this low utility style of site taking at a time when Peak Astralis, I mean, they weren't Peak Astralis anymore, had like revolutionized the game with all the utility, and even teams with way less skill, like Big had made it way higher than they should have done off of utility usage. So having this low util style with almost an old school approach, yeah, that actually had very interesting potential to counter Astralis if the team had mentally been able to hang in those games. I thought it was one of the few teams that could go ahead to them stylistically in a way. They were the rare team. This is very rare. This shows some sort of level of man management, in my opinion. They were the rare team that had the three big star names who could all be the star. They had Elige, Twists, Naf. All of them could be the best player on a top 5 team in the world, could be the star of this team. And they were all three wrecking people, tournament after tournament, all at the same time. Like, this has almost never happened. Even teams like FaZe Clan very rarely could get all the 3 stars on the same page like this. 2 of them, Elysian Twists, used to basically, during that summer of 2019, battle each other for the MVP. And that's why, even though Elige won a bunch of them, Twist could have won all those in many cases as well. He was absolutely incredible. It's just Elige had kind of the more all-around polished game, I'd say, and looked like the engine of the team. After that, though, it's not like he left the team then. They had their issues. Like, they were the favourite to win that major. As I pointed out in an article, they were the biggest favourite ever to win a major. If you looked at what they'd done running into that major and the lack of losses. Quite frankly, the idea the team never won another LAN after that is unbelievable. And part of it was they had tons of problems against Astralis when Astralis played themselves back into form. Obviously, in a classic one I didn't like was it seemed like he didn't understand the pacing and style of how to play against Astralis. He could smash the other teams, even teams that can beat Astralis like Na'Vi. I always thought there was timeout concerns. I've almost never seen this guy take a timeout, and I've seen his team mentally tilt, erode, confidence go down, get blown out in nuke halves, etc., just getting torn up and toyed with by Astralis, and he was never taking the time out. He was never getting in there psychologically, because I don't think that's the level he operates. I think he just saw the game as simple, like, right, you do this again, let's get back to that, let's go back to this. Like, I felt like he never was able to get a handle on the psychology of the team and manage them in that respect. And now we forget in this 2020 period, they did fuck all, basically. I thought it was mad underwhelming. I know there was no international play. I know they give the excuse in the video, you're stuck in NA. So you didn't do that well in NA, mate. Where's all the championships? So I don't totally hate it. I don't like the fact that adreN just took time off and did nothing, as far as I can tell. Like, would he just never have been a coach again? And Team Liquid didn't ask. That ain't a great sign. It's not like he was that good a coach that you have to have him, even if he hasn't been around and didn't show any signs of doing anything else. I also don't see this tactical angle they're playing up. For a layman, I think adreN used to do really good videos, like breaking down concepts in games and simple things, but it was always quite simple. That's my point. That's his strength, in my opinion. Just looking at some simple fundamentals and how basic interactions should take place, which is a part of coaching. But if you want to talk about the tactical masterminds of the game, I've never seen it. Like, as a player, when he was the in-game leader, I thought he never did it. And I knew some of his teammates who were like, he calls very simple stuff. He's actually quite bad at reacting when we get into like close game scenarios. The first time as coach, like I say, it was about turning the boys loose, the fraggers, getting the right interactions, getting the star players on the same page at the same time. It wasn't really about utility usage, like anti-stratting, like we're going to run this over and over and over again. It really wasn't, actually. Then you look now, is he really going to bring that now at this point in his career? I don't buy it, quite frankly. I also have issues with him as a leader. Now, you got Thorin, that makes up for it that he didn't have when he was in Team Liquid 2019. Maybe that can work. I don't really see him as like a vocal, psychological leader of the team. Quite frankly, I have my suspicions if it is someone like Elige or Thorin who's behind this move. Thorin, again, doesn't want a real coach, and I suggest Elige prefers someone who's a yes man, someone who he's on the same page with, similar way of thinking. They've worked together many, many years, and therefore, he's not going to have disputes. There's not going to be any conflict here. Things are just going to be great. I've always wondered, I'll say it again, what if, they let Taco go back to MIBR, but they kept Zeus? That would have been the interesting move for me. I always wondered if that could have been the move to take them over the top against the Astralis of the world, win a major, etc. Now, I will say, adreN also has a worse lineup now, in my opinion, than the one he won all those titles with in 2019. He potentially has a better in-game leader in Orpa. Some of that remains to be seen. But he's lost some of the other firepower and some of the special players he had elsewhere in his team, in my opinion. So I actually hope, quite frankly, that Moses comes back to being talent. I hope he comes back to doing content with me. We certainly plan to keep doing content, keep doing counterpoints, etc. I'm not sure if it'll be enough for him, where the industry's at the moment. We don't have the lands back. He was one of those people who felt that there was a lack of room to grow within those fields. The tournament organisers love to play off the tier 2 against the tier 1 against people like him and fuck with your rates and ask you to take less or ask you to sign up for multiple events in a rate that they wouldn't do to the other person and then pretend that other person's tier 1 when they promote them over you. There's a lot of fuckery, and I can understand a lot of reasons why he might be hesitant to come back, but I feel as though unless he has another good coaching gig lined up and he's ready to mentally reset and move on, content is an area where tomorrow he can immediately jump back on the saddle and be very good again. We need him, quite frankly. I think tier 1 in CSGO right now, there's people in the scene, but not that many of them are working the events right now, boys. I think we really lack for truly elite tier 1 talent.
Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. Andrew, shut the fuck up, you piece of shit. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's going to be a wild ride. GG, motherfuckers.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Kris with a K, Lager15, Pronogo, Shenlong, Zachary Carter, Adam Ochs, Alexander Rao, Andreas Kroknes, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks going out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest topics or guests for my shows? Want to ask me questions in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to be part of one of those discussions I do where we nerd out. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today by using the Patreon link in the description box below.